It started with a swipe I never should have made. A boring night, a restless mind, and a dating app one had sworn I was done with. I wasn't even looking for anything serious, just scrolling out of habit, half awake in the glow of my phone. Faces blurred past, people I'd forget in seconds. And then I froze. There, staring back at me with a smile so familiar it made my stomach twist, was the one face I could never mistake. My CEO, the woman who owned the company I worked for. The billionaire boss everyone feared and admired. At first, I laughed, certain it had to be fake. Someone using her photo, pretending to be her. But the profile was too detailed, too sharp, too real. The thought made my chest tighten. What if it really was her? What if she was out here, swiping like the rest of us? I should have swiped left. I should have thrown my phone across the room and gone to sleep. Instead, my thumb hovered, my heart pounding like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. And before I could talk myself out of it, I swiped right. The screen lit up in red. It's a match. And in that single moment, my life stopped being ordinary forever. The night was one of those that felt heavier than usual, the kind where silence filled the apartment, so completely that even the sound of my own breathing felt too loud. I sat curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone out of habit more than desire, my thumb moving lazily over the screen as if it had a mind of its own. The city outside my window buzzed faintly, muffled through glass. But I was somewhere else entirely, in that strange in-between space of loneliness and distraction where you don't want to think, but can't stop feeling. I had always told myself dating apps weren't for me. Too shallow, too fast, too full of empty conversations that ended before they even began. And maybe deep down, I just didn't believe love was something waiting for me in pixels and swipes. Being a lesbian in a world where people still whispered behind closed doors wasn't easy. Dating was hard enough. Add my own hesitations and fears, and most nights I just accepted the quiet emptiness as part of my life. But that night, with nothing but silence pressing in, I re-downloaded Tinder. A mistake, probably, but I didn't care. I swiped aimlessly, half looking at profiles, half drifting in thought. A student here, an artist there, faces smiling, pouting, trying too hard or not enough. They all blurred into one long stream of strangers who meant nothing to me. I didn't expect to feel anything. I didn't expect to stop. And then I did. My breath caught like someone had punched me in the chest. My thumb froze over the screen, and my eyes widened in disbelief. The profile staring back at me wasn't just another stranger. It was her, my CEO. The woman whose name made entire boardrooms fall silent, the billionaire who owned the empire where I worked, the figure of untouchable power and impossible elegance. Her photo was sharper than the rest. Professional, yet somehow casual enough to pass as personal. A white shirt, open collar, hair tied back in a way that revealed her cheekbones, her jawline, the piercing gaze I'd felt from across meeting rooms, but never like this. At first, I laughed, though the sound cracked in my throat. It had to be fake. Someone was using her pictures. Maybe a cruel joke, maybe just another catfish. But the profile wasn't hollow. The bio was brief, witty in a way only she could be. The details lined up. The way she phrased her words, it felt like her voice. The realization hit me, like ice down my spine. What if it was real? What if she was out here, swiping in the same loneliness I was drowning in? I should have locked my phone and never looked again. It was madness. Dangerous. My boss. My billionaire boss. She was my world in the office. Someone whose signature decided fates, whose words shaped futures. I was just another employee in her vast empire, invisible in the sea of names and numbers. What could she possibly see in me? What could come of even daring to touch this? I told myself to swipe left, to erase the possibility, to walk away before it even existed. But my thumb trembled, suspended like I was holding on to a secret I wasn't ready to let go of. I thought about her the way she walked into meetings, her heels striking the floor like punctuation, her voice calm but commanding, her presence filling every space. I thought about how I had once caught her laughing quietly in the hallway when she thought no one was listening, a sound so rare it had stayed with me for weeks. And I thought about what it would mean if she was here, not as my CEO, not as the billionaire everyone feared, but as a woman alone at night, swiping just like me. The weight of that thought tipped me over the edge. My thumb moved almost on its own, and the screen flipped. A red flash appeared across the top. It's a match. My heart dropped, then shot upward so fast I thought I might faint. A match. Not just with anyone, but with her. My phone trembled in my hand, my pulse thundering in my ears. I stared at the screen as if it might disappear, as if this was a dream I could wake from any second. The app showed her name, her face, the green notification glowing like temptation itself. She had swiped right too. I sat frozen, unable to process what this meant. Did she know? Did she recognize me? Or was I just another face to her, blurred in a moment of boredom? My mind spun with possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. If she knew who I was, then this wasn't just a match. It was a secret, a risk, a line neither of us should cross. And yet, if she didn't know, then what would happen when she did? I imagined the next day at work, sitting through a meeting, catching her eyes across the table and knowing that somewhere in her phone, my face was there too. I should have closed the app. I should have put my phone down and forgotten the whole thing. But instead I stayed, staring at her profile, rereading every word as though it might hold a hidden message just for me. Hours slipped by, the silence of my apartment now filled with the deafening roar of possibility. Every vibration of my phone made my stomach lurch. Every notification a question of whether it was her, whether she would reach out. I was terrified. I was exhilarated. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt alive. That night, lying in bed, I clutched my phone to my chest, too afraid to delete the app, too excited to sleep. I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind, the image of her face on that screen, the word match glowing like fire between us. My CEO, my untouchable boss, had swiped right. And I didn't know if it was the beginning of something beautiful or the biggest mistake of my life. I woke up the next morning with my phone still on the pillow beside me, the Tinder app open as if it had been guarding the secret all night. My first instinct was to believe it had all been a dream, a strange fantasy born from loneliness and exhaustion. But the red notification was still there, clear and undeniable. It was real. She had matched with me. The weight of that truth pressed into my chest until I could barely breathe. I dragged myself through my usual routine, brushing my teeth, brewing coffee, showering, dressing for work, but everything felt out of place, like the world had tilted slightly off its axis. Every motion seemed slower, heavier, like I was waiting for something to happen. I tried not to check my phone every 5 seconds. I failed miserably. By the time I got to the office, my nerves were raw. I stepped into the building, and the air seemed charged, though nothing had changed. People bustled through the lobby, security scanned IDs. The smell of burnt coffee lingered from the cafe near the elevators. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't unsee the image of her profile. I couldn't unfeel the way my stomach had dropped when the match appeared. It was her, my CEO, the woman I could hear commanding entire rooms with a single word, now linked to me on a dating app meant for chance connections. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart leapt. It was her. A simple message. So I guess we've matched. My fingers shook as I stared at the screen. She knew. She wasn't pretending. My lungs burned with every breath as I typed back. I guess we have. I deleted it. Typed again. Didn't expect to see you here. Deleted again. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt safe. Finally, with trembling hands, I settled on the simplest reply. Hi. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. She was waiting. She was there. Hi yourself, she replied. I exhaled so sharply it almost made me dizzy. She wasn't angry. She wasn't accusing. She was playing along, light, casual, almost teasing. I wondered if she knew how badly my body trembled as I stood there in the middle of the office lobby, pretending to be calm while my entire life threatened to unravel. Through the morning, our messages continued in short bursts. She asked me how I was, what I was working on, little things that should have felt like small talk but somehow didn't. Her tone was different from what I knew of her. At work, she was sharp, precise, intimidating. On Tinder, she was warm, playful, and strangely vulnerable. She told me she didn't use the app much, that she downloaded it when the nights got too quiet. She joked about being terrible at swiping because she rarely matched with anyone. I laughed aloud when I read that, though it was the kind of laugh that came from disbelief. A billionaire CEO confessing to me, a low-level employee, about being lonely on Tinder, it felt impossible. By noon, I couldn't focus on anything else. My emails blurred. Meetings dragged like background noise. All I could think about was my phone and her words appearing on the screen. At one point, during a team meeting, I felt her eyes on me across the table. My pulse shot up instantly. Her gaze was as steady as always. But this time it meant something different, something only we knew. I tried not to look back, but it was useless. I caught her watching me, and the smallest flicker of a smile tugged at her lips before she turned her attention to someone else. My heart hammered so loudly I thought everyone in the room could hear it. That night, our conversation deepened. She asked me questions no one else had asked. About my childhood, about my family, about why I never posted anything personal online. I hesitated at first, but her tone was disarming. I told her things I usually hid, that growing up as a lesbian in a conservative family had left me cautious, that I felt invisible in most rooms, that I worked harder than anyone else but never felt seen. She listened. She responded with empathy, not pity, and slowly, the walls I had built around myself began to crack. She shared her own truths, too. She told me how isolating it was to sit at the top of an empire, how everyone wanted something from her, how people admired her power but never her person. She admitted she hadn't been on a real date in years. She confessed that she envied people who could be ordinary, who could walk down the street unnoticed. Her vulnerability caught me off guard. In the office, she was untouchable. On my screen, she was human. For the first time, I saw the woman behind the empire, and it made my chest ache. The conversations grew longer, spilling into the early hours of the morning. Flirtation wove its way in naturally, almost unspoken at first. A playful jab about how distracted I seemed at work, a teasing comment about my smile and my profile picture. I found myself grinning at my phone like a teenager, heart racing with every buzz of a new message. But beneath the excitement, fear gnawed at me. What was I doing? She was my boss. If anyone found out, I could lose everything. My job, my career, my reputation. And yet, the idea of pulling away felt impossible. She made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. She made me feel like I mattered. The danger was real, but so was the pull, and the more I tried to resist it, the deeper I sank. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her message appeared. Asterisk, we should meet outside of work. Somewhere no one knows us. Asterisk, my breath caught. My fingers froze above the keyboard. It was the invitation I had been both dreading and longing for. Every rational part of me screamed to say no, to protect myself, to walk away before this went too far. But the truth was, I already knew it was too late. She had already slipped past my defenses. I typed back slowly, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. Where? Her reply came within seconds. Asterisk dinner. Just the two of us. No business. Just us. Asterisk. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My life had already changed the moment I swiped right. But this was the moment I knew there was no turning back. The day after she suggested dinner, I couldn't think of anything else. I tried to bury myself in work, typing reports, attending meetings, nodding along when people spoke to me, but my mind was consumed by that single message glowing on my screen. Dinner. Just us. It sounded so simple, But beneath it was everything complicated, everything dangerous, everything I both feared and wanted. I imagined the possibilities over and over again, what it would feel like to sit across from her in a setting that wasn't defined by contracts or deadlines, where she wasn't my CEO and I wasn't just her employee. I told myself it might just be dinner, just two women talking. But deep inside I knew that wasn't true. There was a current between us, an invisible thread tugging tighter with every word we exchanged. I stared at her message until my hands began to sweat. I typed out excuses in my head, ways to decline politely, to step back before this crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But each excuse rang hollow. The truth was I didn't want to say no. I had spent so long drifting through my life, unseen and untouched, convincing myself that loneliness was easier than risk. And now here she was, this powerful, unreachable woman inviting me into her world in a way no one else ever had. I thought of her late-night confessions, the honesty in her words when she admitted she felt isolated despite all her wealth and power. I thought of how she told me she envied the kind of life I had, simple and unnoticed, something I had always resented in myself. We were opposites, and yet our loneliness mirrored each other perfectly. When I finally replied, my heart raced so fast it felt like it might break free from my chest. Asterisk okay. Dinner. Asterisk, that was all I wrote. Simple but final. She responded almost instantly. Asterisk, tomorrow night. I'll send you the address. Don't worry, it's private. Asterisk private. That word made my breath hitch. Private enough to be safe, or private enough to be dangerous. I didn't know, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting it. The next day crawled by in a haze. Every tick of the clock was louder than usual. Every glance from a coworker sharper, as if everyone around me could somehow sense the secret humming beneath my skin. When I passed her in the hall, she barely looked at me, her expression as neutral as ever, her posture unshakably confident. To anyone else, it was business as usual. But when her eyes flicked to mine for half a second longer than necessary, I felt heat rush through me like fire. No one noticed, but I did, and I carried that look with me for the rest of the day. By the time evening came, I was a mess of nerves. I stood in front of the mirror, changing outfits a dozen times, every choice feeling either too casual or too formal. I didn't know what she expected. Should I dress as though I were meeting a boss, or as though I were meeting a date? The thought of the second made my stomach flutter, and in the end, I chose something in between. A black dress simple enough not to scream for attention, paired with a jacket to anchor me in some illusion of professionalism. My hands trembled as I applied makeup, and my heart pounded as I hailed a cab to the address she had sent. The restaurant was tucked away on a quiet street I had never noticed before. It was small but elegant, the kind of place that exuded wealth without flaunting it, hidden away from curious eyes. When I stepped inside, the lighting was dim, warm, and intimate, and a host guided me to a secluded table at the back. And there she was, already seated, waiting for me. Seeing her outside of the office felt like stepping into another world. She wore a silk blouse in a deep shade of blue, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, softer than the perfectly controlled styles I was used to seeing. Her eyes lifted as I approached, and for a moment, the intensity of her gaze rooted me to the spot. But then she smiled, not the tight, polite smile she used in boardrooms, but something real, something almost shy, and my knees nearly buckled. "You came," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth I had never heard from her before. "Of course," I managed, though my voice wavered. We sat, and the waiter came briefly to pour wine and list specials, but I barely heard a word. All my attention was fixed on her, on the way she leaned slightly forward, on how her eyes held mine with a steadiness that made my heart stutter. We began to talk, at first cautiously, like testing the temperature of unfamiliar waters. She asked about my day, I asked about hers. It felt surreal, speaking to her as though we were equals, as though we weren't divided by power and wealth. But soon, the conversation shifted, deepening the way it always did between us. She asked about my dreams, what I wanted beyond work, beyond the life I had settled for. No one had ever asked me that before, not really. I hesitated, afraid of sounding foolish, but she listened with such genuine interest that the words spilled out of me. I told her about wanting to travel, about wanting to write, about how I often felt trapped by my own fears. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss me. She told me I deserved more than I gave myself credit for. And then she shared, too. She spoke of her struggles, of how success came with shackles she never anticipated. She confessed that she often wondered if anyone would ever see her for who she was, not for her power or her money. "Do you know how rare it is," she said quietly, "to sit with someone who isn't trying to impress me or use me?" The vulnerability in her voice made my chest ache. I realized then that beneath her perfect exterior was a woman who longed for connection just as desperately as I did. As the night stretched on, laughter mixed with lingering silences, charged with unspoken feelings. Every brush of her hand against the table near mine sent sparks through me. Every glance she gave me lingered just a little too long. When the dinner ended, neither of us moved to leave right away. We sat there, suspended in a bubble of intimacy, as though the outside world had ceased to exist. When we finally stood, she walked me outside. The night air was cool, wrapping around us as we stood close, too close for colleagues. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. My pulse raced, my breath caught, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to lean in. But then she exhaled softly, breaking the spell, and said, "I'll see you soon." I nodded, my voice lost somewhere between my heart and throat. She smiled one last time, slipped into her car, and disappeared into the night, leaving me trembling on the sidewalk with the taste of something forbidden and beautiful lingering in the air. That night, lying awake in my bed, I replayed every second, every glance, every word. I knew I was in deeper than I should be. I knew the risks were growing with every step I took. But I also knew, with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified me, that I was falling and there was no turning back now. The days after that dinner blurred into something that felt both surreal and unbearably sharp, like walking through a dream where every sound and glance carried new meaning. At work, nothing seemed to have changed. She was still the CEO, still the woman whose voice commanded rooms full of men in suits, still the figure who made entire teams scramble at a single word. But to me, everything was different. I couldn't look at her without remembering the softness in her smile at the restaurant, the way she had leaned toward me as though we were the only two people in the world. I carried those moments with me like a hidden flame, warming and burning all at once. We didn't speak about the dinner directly in the office. Our conversations stayed confined to the glow of our phones, late at night or in stolen moments during the day. But those conversations grew deeper, more daring. She told me about her childhood, about how she had clawed her way up from nothing, about the sacrifices she had made to build the empire she now ruled. She admitted she sometimes wondered if it had been worth it. I told her about my own struggles, how I often felt invisible in the very company where I poured my energy every day, how I dreamed of more but didn't know how to reach for it. She told me I deserved more, that she saw things in me I couldn't see in myself. And each time she said something like that, I felt a piece of me shift, like she was rearranging the very foundation I had built my life on. When she asked me to meet her again, I didn't hesitate this time. The thought of saying no never even crossed my mind. She chose another private place, even more discreet than before, a restaurant hidden in the corner of the city that felt almost invisible from the outside. I arrived early, my heart thundering as I walked through the doors, but she was already there waiting just as before. She looked different again, this time in a simple black dress that clung to her in a way that made my chest tighten. Her hair was down, framing her face in loose waves, and when she saw me, her eyes softened in a way that made me feel like the ground beneath me was shifting. Dinner was quieter this time, more charged. We talked, yes, but there were longer silences between our words. Silences that were filled with unspoken things that hovered in the air like sparks waiting to catch fire. Every brush of her hand against her wine glass, every slight movement she made, drew my eyes. I tried to focus on the food, on keeping my hands from shaking, but it was useless. The attraction was no longer something subtle or hidden. It was alive, a current between us that neither of us could ignore. At one point, she leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Do you know how dangerous this is?" she asked, though her lips curled into the faintest smile. "Yes," I whispered, my throat tight. "And yet here we are," she murmured, her gaze locking with mine. I couldn't look away. The weight of her eyes on me made my body hum with awareness. Every nerve lit up like electricity. It felt as though the entire room had faded, leaving just the two of us in a suspended moment, teetering on the edge of something that could change everything. When the dinner ended, she didn't suggest parting ways as she had the first time. Instead, she walked with me outside, her hand brushing against mine as we stepped into the night air. The touch was accidental, fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me that left me breathless. We stood there for a moment, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body, close enough that I could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, then lifted her hand slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture was so intimate, so tender, that my knees nearly gave out. "I don't know what's happening to me," she said softly, almost to herself. "Me neither," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Her eyes searched mine, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might kiss me right there on the sidewalk, in full view of whoever happened to pass by. The anticipation was so sharp it hurt. But instead, she stepped back slightly, her control snapping back into place like a shield. "Come with me," she said, her tone calm but laced with something deeper, something raw. I followed her without a word, my pulse racing as we slipped into her car. The ride was silent, but not empty, the kind of silence that was heavy with everything unsaid. I watched the city lights blur past the window, my reflection pale and wide-eyed in the glass, until the car pulled up to a towering building that glittered against the night sky. Her penthouse. The elevator ride felt endless, the numbers ticking upward in slow motion. My palms were damp, my breath uneven, but when the doors opened and she led me inside, I forgot how to breathe altogether. Her home was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the city, sleek furniture arranged with effortless elegance, everything exuding wealth and taste. But what struck me most wasn't the luxury. It was the intimacy of being led into her private world, a place few people had probably ever seen. She poured us each a glass of wine, her movements smooth and deliberate, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her jaw. She wasn't as composed as she wanted to seem. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands clasped together, feeling like I was balanced on the edge of a precipice. She joined me, close enough that our thighs brushed, and the contact sent heat racing through me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile, until she finally turned to me. "I shouldn't have brought you here," she said, her voice low. "Then why did you?" I asked, my own voice trembling. Her eyes softened, her walls cracking in a way I had never seen before. "Because I couldn't stop myself." The confession broke something open inside me. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the risks or the consequences. I just moved, closing the distance between us. The moment my lips met hers, the world exploded into heat and light. Her kiss was both fierce and hesitant, like she was pouring years of restraint into a single moment. My hands trembled as they found her shoulders, and she pulled me closer, deepening the kiss until I thought I might dissolve entirely. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, she pressed her forehead against mine. "This changes everything," she whispered. "I know." I breathed, my chest heaving. And in that moment, sitting in her penthouse with the city sprawling out beneath us. I knew she was right. Everything had already changed. The days after that dinner blurred into something that felt both surreal and unbearably sharp, like walking through a dream where every sound and glance carried new meaning. At work, nothing seemed to have changed. She was still the CEO, still the woman whose voice commanded rooms full of men in suits, still the figure who made entire teams scramble at a single word. But to me, everything was different. I couldn't look at her without remembering the softness in her smile at the restaurant, the way she had leaned toward me as though we were the only two people in the world. I carried those moments with me like a hidden flame, warming and burning all at once. We didn't speak about the dinner directly in the office. Our conversations stayed confined to the glow of our phones, late at night or in stolen moments during the day. But those conversations grew deeper, more daring. She told me about her childhood, about how she had clawed her way up from nothing, about the sacrifices she had made to build the empire she now ruled. She admitted she sometimes wondered if it had been worth it. I told her about my own struggles, how I often felt invisible in the very company where I poured my energy every day, how I dreamed of more but didn't know how to reach for it. She told me I deserved more, that she saw things in me I couldn't see in myself. And each time she said something like that, I felt a piece of me shift, like she was rearranging the very foundation I had built my life on. When she asked me to meet her again, I didn't hesitate this time. The thought of saying no never even crossed my mind. She chose another private place, even more discreet than before, a restaurant hidden in the corner of the city that felt almost invisible from the outside. I arrived early, my heart thundering as I walked through the doors, but she was already there waiting just as before. She looked different again, this time in a simple black dress that clung to her in a way that made my chest tighten. Her hair was down, framing her face in loose waves, and when she saw me, her eyes softened in a way that made me feel like the ground beneath me was shifting. Dinner was quieter this time, more charged. We talked, yes, but there were longer silences between our words. Silences that were filled with unspoken things that hovered in the air like sparks waiting to catch fire. Every brush of her hand against her wine glass, every slight movement she made, drew my eyes. I tried to focus on the food, on keeping my hands from shaking, but it was useless. The attraction was no longer something subtle or hidden. It was alive, a current between us that neither of us could ignore. At one point, she leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Do you know how dangerous this is?" she asked, though her lips curled into the faintest smile. "Yes," I whispered, my throat tight. "And yet here we are," she murmured, her gaze locking with mine. I couldn't look away. The weight of her eyes on me made my body hum with awareness. Every nerve lit up like electricity. It felt as though the entire room had faded, leaving just the two of us in a suspended moment, teetering on the edge of something that could change everything. When the dinner ended, she didn't suggest parting ways as she had the first time. Instead, she walked with me outside, her hand brushing against mine as we stepped into the night air. The touch was accidental, fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me that left me breathless. We stood there for a moment, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body, close enough that I could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, then lifted her hand slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture was so intimate, so tender, that my knees nearly gave out. "I don't know what's happening to me," she said softly, almost to herself. "Me neither," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Her eyes searched mine, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might kiss me right there on the sidewalk, in full view of whoever happened to pass by. The anticipation was so sharp it hurt. But instead, she stepped back slightly, her control snapping back into place like a shield. "Come with me," she said, her tone calm but laced with something deeper, something raw. I followed her without a word, my pulse racing as we slipped into her car. The ride was silent, but not empty, the kind of silence that was heavy with everything unsaid. I watched the city lights blur past the window, my reflection pale and wide-eyed in the glass, until the car pulled up to a towering building that glittered against the night sky. Her penthouse. The elevator ride felt endless, the numbers ticking upward in slow motion. My palms were damp, my breath uneven, but when the doors opened and she led me inside, I forgot how to breathe altogether. Her home was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the city, sleek furniture arranged with effortless elegance, everything exuding wealth and taste. But what struck me most wasn't the luxury. It was the intimacy of being led into her private world, a place few people had probably ever seen. She poured us each a glass of wine, her movements smooth and deliberate, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her jaw. She wasn't as composed as she wanted to seem. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands clasped together, feeling like I was balanced on the edge of a precipice. She joined me, close enough that our thighs brushed, and the contact sent heat racing through me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile, until she finally turned to me. "I shouldn't have brought you here," she said, her voice low. "Then why did you?" I asked, my own voice trembling. Her eyes softened, her walls cracking in a way I had never seen before. Because I couldn't stop myself. The confession broke something open inside me. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the risks or the consequences. I just moved, closing the distance between us. The moment my lips met hers, the world exploded into heat and light. Her kiss was both fierce and hesitant, like she was pouring years of restraint into a single moment. My hands trembled as they found her shoulders, and she pulled me closer, deepening the kiss until I thought I might dissolve entirely. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, she pressed her forehead against mine. "This changes everything," she whispered. "I know." I breathed, my chest heaving. And in that moment, sitting in her penthouse with the city sprawling out beneath us, I knew she was right. Everything had already changed. The morning after I left her penthouse, the city looked different, though I knew it was only me who had changed. The streets bustled with the same hurried footsteps. Horns blared as impatient drivers fought for space. The sun climbed over the glass towers as it always did. But inside me, there was a storm I couldn't quiet. My lips still tingled from her kiss. My body still remembered the weight of her hands, the heat of her touch. I carried that night inside me like a secret flame, hidden but impossible to ignore. As I walked into the office, the familiar walls seemed sharper, every detail heightened, as though the entire building knew what I had done. My chest tightened with the fear that someone might look at me differently, that my secret was written across my face for the world to read. She was already there when I arrived, as she always was, her presence filling the space with the same intimidating authority that had once made me shrink in my seat. But now, it was impossible to see her the same way. I knew what her laugh sounded like in the quiet of her home. I knew what it felt like to have her arms around me. I knew how her lips tasted when the mask of CEO had slipped away. Watching her glide through the office with her usual confidence made me ache in ways I couldn't explain. She didn't glance at me once, didn't offer even the smallest flicker of recognition, and yet I felt her presence everywhere. The distance was suffocating but necessary. We both knew it. Still, as the hours dragged by, I couldn't stop noticing her. Every time she spoke in a meeting, I watched the curve of her mouth, remembering how it had pressed against mine. Every time her eyes swept across the room, I wondered if she let them linger on me a second longer than anyone else. It was unbearable and intoxicating all at once. I could barely focus on my work, my thoughts consumed by what had happened and what it meant. The first text came during lunch. My phone buzzed under the table as I sat in the break room, pretending to scroll through emails. When I opened it, my heart skipped. "Asterisk, you look too serious. Relax. I can feel your nerves from here." Asterisk, my head snapped up instinctively, and across the glass wall of the cafeteria, I saw her in her office, glancing at her phone with the faintest smile tugging at her lips. Heat rushed to my cheeks as I quickly typed back, "I'm trying to act normal." A moment later, her reply appeared. "You're terrible at it." I stifled a laugh, covering my mouth with my hand as though anyone might overhear our private joke. It was dangerous, foolish even, but I couldn't resist the thrill. For the rest of the day, we exchanged subtle messages, hidden in plain sight. Little things, teasing remarks about coworkers, observations about the absurdity of corporate life, fleeting hints of the desire simmering beneath the surface. Each vibration of my phone made my pulse quicken. Each word from her fed the hunger that had taken root inside me. But not everyone was oblivious. I began to notice the stares. A colleague caught me smiling at my phone and raised an eyebrow. Another asked if something good had happened, their tone laced with curiosity. And when I passed her assistant in the hallway, I swore I saw suspicion flicker in her eyes as she looked between us. The walls were closing in faster than I anticipated. I told myself I would be careful, that I would create distance, but the truth was I didn't want distance. I wanted her. One evening, long after most of the office had emptied, I stayed behind to finish a project. Or at least, that was the excuse I told myself. In reality, I couldn't bear to leave knowing she was still upstairs, working late as always. My phone buzzed again. Still here, my breath caught as I typed back. Asterisk yes. You! Asterisk her reply came instantly. Come up. The elevator ride to her floor felt endless, my nerves fraying with every second. When the doors opened, the hallway was silent, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that only came after hours. I walked to her office, my footsteps echoing against the marble, my heart hammering. She opened the door before I could knock, as though she had been waiting, her eyes dark and unreadable. She stepped aside to let me in, closing the door softly behind us. The air between us was thick with everything unsaid. I set my things down on the edge of a chair, trying to act casual, but the tension was too strong. She leaned against her desk, arms crossed, watching me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Do you realize what we're doing?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I whispered, though my voice trembled. Her eyes softened, the hardness in her posture melting away as she stepped closer. "Then why can't I stop?" Neither of us had the answer. The moment her fingers brushed mine, the rest of the world disappeared. She pulled me closer, her lips crashing against mine, and all the restraint we had tried to hold onto shattered in an instant. The kiss was deeper this time, hungrier, as though we had both been starving and finally gave in. My hands tangled in her hair, her grip tightened around my waist, and for those stolen minutes in the locked office, we were no longer CEO and employee. We were just two women caught in a storm neither of us had planned, but both desperately needed. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and trembling, the weight of reality settled back over us. She pressed her forehead to mine, her voice low. "If anyone finds out..." "I know," I said quickly, my chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. "We'd both lose everything," she whispered. And yet, even as she said it, neither of us stepped away. Her hand lingered against my cheek, my fingers still clutching her blouse. We both knew we should stop. We both knew we couldn't. The following days grew more complicated. Rumors began to swirl. Nothing concrete, just whispers about why she seemed distracted, why her eyes sometimes drifted to me in meetings, why I seemed nervous around her. I caught coworkers exchanging glances, heard laughter fade when I walked into a room. Paranoia gnawed at me, but so did desire. Every risk we took only pulled me deeper, and every night I lay awake, torn between fear and longing. I told myself it was only temporary, that eventually the danger would scare us enough to stop. But each stolen glance, each hidden message, each touch when no one was looking only made me want her more. And deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't going to fade. It was only going to grow, and with it, the risks that could consume us both. The night we finally gave in to temptation again was not planned, though I sometimes wonder if all along we had been circling this fire, knowing we would eventually burn. She had left the office earlier than usual, something she rarely did, and before I could even pack up my own things, a message flashed across my phone. Asterisk, come over. No, excuses tonight. Asterisk, my pulse jumped, my hand shook, and yet I didn't hesitate. I told myself it was reckless, that every step I took toward her apartment was another step into dangerous territory. But I was powerless to resist. When I arrived, she was waiting at the door, her hair loose, her usual sharpness replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. For a moment, she didn't say a word, just reached out and pulled me inside, closing the door as though sealing the world away. The penthouse was dimly lit, the city glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a sea of stars. I barely had time to take in the view before she pressed me against the wall, her lips claiming mine with a hunger that sent my thoughts spinning. The kiss was deeper than before, desperate, as though she had been holding herself back for too long and finally broke free. My hands clutched at her shoulders, sliding down the silk of her blouse, feeling the heat of her skin beneath. She murmured my name like a confession, like a prayer, and I melted against her, giving myself to the moment completely. She guided me further into the apartment, her touch never leaving me, her eyes locked onto mine as though she couldn't bear to look away. The usual dominance she carried in the office melted here, replaced by a rawness that made my chest ache. Every caress, every kiss, every sigh between us felt like a secret language only we understood. Clothes fell away slowly, as though we were unwrapping something sacred, something forbidden but necessary. I had never been touched like that before, not just with desire but with reverence, as though she was memorizing every curve, every shiver, every sound I made. And I gave her the same in return, my hands exploring the places she kept hidden from the world, learning her body like it was a map leading to somewhere I had always been meant to find. The night stretched endlessly, filled with whispers and laughter and gasps we tried to muffle. In her arms, I didn't feel like her employee or someone sneaking into a secret I shouldn't have touched. I felt seen, wholly and completely, as though she had stripped away every mask I wore and still wanted me. She held me close after, her breath warm against my neck, her hand resting on my hip like she was afraid I might disappear. We lay tangled in silk sheets, the city glowing around us, and for the first time in years, she let her guard down. She told me about her past, about the nights she had spent alone building her empire, while everyone else her age was falling in love or making mistakes. She confessed how lonely power could be, how the world worshipped her success but rarely saw the woman behind it. I listened, my heart aching, because in that moment she wasn't my boss or the billionaire whose name carried weight across the city. She was just a woman, vulnerable, flawed, yearning for the same thing I had always wanted. Someone to see her, to love her without expectation. I told her about my own fears, about feeling invisible, about how I had built walls around my heart because it felt safer than letting anyone close. She kissed me softly then, not out of desire but out of understanding, as though promising me she would keep those walls down. We drifted in and out of sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I woke again to her touch, her lips against my shoulder, her fingers tracing idle patterns across my skin. Each time felt like the first, fresh and overwhelming, as though our bodies couldn't get enough of the other. Hours passed, and still we clung to each other, unable to stop, unwilling to let go. By the time dawn crept across the skyline, painting her penthouse in shades of gold and pink, I was exhausted, my body sore and trembling, but I had never felt more alive. When I finally sat up, pulling the sheet around me, reality began to creep back in. My phone buzzed with missed emails, reminders of the world waiting for me outside this bubble of warmth and desire. She stirred beside me, watching with sleepy eyes that still burned with the intensity one had come to know too well. "Stay," she murmured, her voice rough from the night. I can't, I whispered, though every part of me wanted to. Her hand reached for mine, her grip gentle but firm. Then promise me this won't be the last time. I hesitated, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The risk of being caught, the whispers already growing in the office, the danger of mixing desire with power. But when I looked at her, when I saw the vulnerability she hid from everyone else, I knew I couldn't deny her. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. It won't be. And in that moment, I realized there was no turning back. Whatever this was between us, it was no longer something fleeting or impulsive. It was deeper, heavier, something that bound us together in ways neither of us could escape. The danger was real, the stakes higher than I had ever imagined. But as I leaned down to kiss her once more, I knew I was already too far gone. By the time I slipped out of her penthouse, the city was fully awake, the streets alive with people rushing to their routines. I walked among them like a ghost, my body still buzzing with her touch, my mind tangled in the storm we had created. I knew it was only a matter of time before the world discovered our secret, before whispers turned into truths, before lines blurred too far to repair. But I also knew something else. I didn't care. She was mine now in ways no one else had ever been, and I wasn't ready to give that up, no matter the cost. The week after that night felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between a secret that made my heart race and a reality that could destroy us both. At work, the atmosphere had shifted in a way only I could feel. Every glance from her across the conference table, every subtle brush of her hand when we passed in the hall, carried a hidden weight, a language no one else understood. To everyone else, she was the same untouchable billionaire CEO, commanding, focused, precise. But to me, she was also the woman whose breath I felt against my skin just nights ago, the one who whispered promises into my ear with trembling honesty. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. The problem was, secrets had a way of leaking through cracks, and ours was beginning to drip. I noticed it first in the way some of my colleagues looked at me. Small, fleeting glances that lingered too long. Whispers that died down the moment I entered the break room. A strange tightness in conversations where my name was mentioned. At first, I told myself it was paranoia. I had always been a little self-conscious, and maybe I was just projecting my fears onto harmless interactions. But then one afternoon, as I walked into the office kitchen, I overheard two women from accounting murmuring to each other. "She's definitely spending time with someone," one said. "She looks different, like glowing." The other chuckled. "Yeah, but have you noticed how the boss keeps looking at her lately? It's weird, almost personal." My chest tightened, and I ducked out before they could see me, my coffee mug clutched so tightly my fingers hurt. That night, when I went to her penthouse again, I couldn't stop thinking about it. She poured me a glass of wine, her expression softening as she leaned against the counter, watching me with eyes that stripped away all my defenses. "You're quiet," she said gently. I hesitated, then told her what I'd heard. For a moment, her face was unreadable, the polished mask of control slipping into place as though she was already calculating a solution. Then she sighed, set her glass down and stepped closer. "Let them whisper," she said softly. "They don't matter." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't, because we both knew they did matter. She had built an empire on her reputation, on the sharp line she drew between personal and professional. A scandal could ruin not just her image, but her company, and my career would be nothing more than collateral damage. I wanted to believe we could exist in a bubble where the world couldn't touch us, but the truth was closing in. She must have seen the fear in my eyes, because she cupped my face in her hands and kissed me softly, whispering against my lips, "I won't let them hurt you." And in that moment, I believed her, even though I knew she couldn't control everything. The following days only grew heavier. A male coworker, someone who had always been a little too smug, a little too curious, cornered me in the hallway. "So," he said, smirking, "what's it like having the boss's attention? You must have some secrets the rest of us don't." His tone was light, teasing, but the implication underneath made my stomach twist. I brushed him off, forced a laugh, and walked away as quickly as I could, but his words echoed in my head long after. At night, with her, the world still felt magical. She would hold me close, running her fingers through my hair as though she couldn't believe I was real. We talked about dreams, about fears, about everything in between. She opened up about the crushing expectations of her position, the loneliness that had followed her like a shadow since her first million. And I opened up about the years I had spent hiding, about the shame I carried for never truly letting myself be seen. Those moments were pure, unshakable, the kind of intimacy that felt too deep to ever be broken. But during the day, I felt the cracks widening, the whispers growing louder. One Friday evening, as I was packing up to leave, she asked me to stay late. Not in the office, in her private study. It was risky, dangerous even, but I went. When the door closed behind us, she dropped her professional mask instantly, her hands finding mine, her body leaning into me like she had been holding herself back all day. But then she pulled away, her expression unusually tense. "They're starting to notice," she said. My heart sank, though I had already known it. She paced, her hands running through her hair in frustration. I've dealt with boardroom battles, lawsuits, corporate takeovers. But this feels like something I can't control. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her arm. "We can be careful," I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew careful might no longer be enough. She turned to me, her eyes stormy, but filled with something softer underneath. "I don't want to be careful with you. I don't want to hide. For the first time in years, I feel alive. And I'm supposed to give that up because of what people might say." Her vulnerability shook me. This woman, who was feared and respected by everyone, was standing in front of me admitting that I made her feel alive. I wanted to say I didn't care about the whispers, that I would follow her through any fire, but the truth pressed heavily on my chest. "It's not just people," I whispered back. "It's the world, your company, my job, everything we've worked for." We stood there, the silence thick between us, both knowing the stakes but unwilling to walk away. Finally, she pulled me into her arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Then let them come," she murmured into my hair. "Whatever storm they bring, we'll face it together." That night, as I lay tangled in her sheets, once more, listening to her breathing steady beside me, I wondered how long we could live like this, caught between passion and secrecy, love and risk. The whispers were turning into suspicions, suspicions into rumors, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything we had built in the shadows was dragged into the light. But even with that fear gnawing at me, I couldn't leave. I wouldn't leave, because what we had was worth every risk, every whisper, every storm that was coming. The breaking point arrived faster than either of us expected. It started on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that should have passed without notice, but instead it became the day everything unraveled. I had barely settled into my desk when an email landed in my inbox. Not from her, not from a client, but an anonymous account. No greeting, no signature, just a single line and an attachment. Asterisk, secrets don't stay hidden forever. Asterisk, my heart pounded as I clicked on the file, and there it was, a grainy but undeniable photo of us leaving her penthouse together late at night, her hand brushing mine, our bodies angled too close for it to look like anything professional. My blood went cold. Whoever had taken that picture had been watching, waiting, and now they had evidence. My first instinct was to delete it, pretend it had never arrived, but I knew better. Someone had us in their sights, and pretending wouldn't make it disappear. I barely made it through the day, my hands trembling every time I touched my keyboard, every laugh from my coworkers sounding like a mockery aimed directly at me. When I finally got to her office that evening, my chest tight and my throat dry, she could tell immediately that something was wrong. I handed her my phone, and as she read the email, her expression hardened into something fierce, protective, and terrifying all at once. She set the phone down, her fingers curling into fists. "They think they can blackmail me," she said quietly, her voice steady but trembling with restrained rage. "They think they can control me with this." I wanted to ask who they were, but deep down I already knew. Corporate sharks, jealous employees, people who had been waiting for her to stumble. I reached for her hand, and she finally looked at me, her eyes softening even as her jaw remained tight. "We can't run anymore," she whispered. "It's going to come out. The only choice we have is how." My stomach twisted at her words because she was right. The storm was here, and we couldn't hide from it. That night, instead of falling into each other's arms like we usually did, we sat across from one another at her dining table, planning. She laid out options like chess moves, deny everything, fight the rumors, frame it as a lie. But every path led back to the same place, the truth. "If we try to bury it, they'll only dig harder," she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "But if we own it, if we tell them ourselves, then they can't use it against us." The thought of standing in front of the world, of admitting to an affair with my billionaire boss, made my skin crawl with fear. I imagined the headlines, the judgment, the way my family would react. But when I looked at her, really looked at her, I knew what my answer was. "Then we tell them," I whispered, surprising even myself. Her eyes searched mine for a long moment, as though she was making sure I understood the weight of what I was agreeing to. Then she reached across the table, taking my hand in hers, and for the first time in days she smiled. The following morning was chaos. Her PR team worked around the clock, drafting statements, preparing for the firestorm. She stood tall, commanding, unshaken on the surface, but I could see the cracks when she looked at me in private. I, on the other hand, was unraveling. My coworkers' stares burned into my skin, whispers turning into open conversations that stopped the second I entered the room. I heard my name paired with words like promotion, favoritism, sleeping her way up. Each one cut into me, sharper than the last, but I swallowed it down because I had chosen her. The press conference was scheduled for Friday morning, and those days leading up to it were some of the longest of my life. Every second dragged, every silence felt like a weight. She tried to shield me, to keep me from the worst of it, but the truth was already bleeding out into the world. News outlets speculated, gossip blogs ran with unconfirmed stories, and online forums turned us into a scandal worth dissecting. Yet, through it all, we clung to each other, stealing moments in the quiet of her office, our hands brushing, our eyes locking, silently reminding each other that we were not alone in this. When Friday arrived, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Cameras flashed the moment we stepped into the room, the air electric with curiosity and hunger. She took her place at the podium, her posture impeccable, her voice calm and unwavering. And then, with the world watching, she told them. She didn't frame it as a mistake or an accident. She spoke of connection, of love found in the most unexpected place. She acknowledged the risk, the conflict, the weight of her position, but she didn't flinch. And when she reached out her hand for mine, in front of everyone, I took it. My knees shook, my palms were slick with sweat, but I stood beside her, letting them see us together. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Headlines screamed about ethics, favoritism, betrayal of power. Some called it inspiring, others called it disgusting. Investors threatened to pull out. Board members demanded answers, and my inbox filled with both messages of support and ones dripping with venom. My world tilted on its axis, and for a while, I wasn't sure I could survive it. But she never let go of me. She held me when I cried, defended me when the questions grew too sharp, and reminded me again and again that love was worth more than reputation. Weeks passed, and slowly, the storm began to settle. The noise didn't disappear completely, it never would, but it dulled into the background. People moved on to new scandals, new gossip, new distractions. At work, things were different. Some people avoided me, others looked at me with new respect, and a few even confessed their quiet admiration. I knew my career would never be the same, that I would always be the girl who dated the boss. But I also knew I was more than that. We were more than that. One night, months later, we sat on her balcony overlooking the city. The chaos had thinned, the world had found other stories to devour, and it was just us again, bathed in the glow of 1,000 lights. She turned to me, her hand finding mine, her expression soft in a way only I ever got to see. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. I thought about everything we had endured, the fear, the whispers, the judgment. And then I thought about the nights wrapped in her arms, the mornings waking to her smile, the way she made me feel like I was finally living instead of just surviving. I shook my head. Not for a second. She kissed me then, slow and unhurried. A kiss that carried no secrets, no fear, no shame. Just love. And in that moment, I knew we had survived, not because the world allowed us to, but because we had chosen each other again and again, no matter the cost.